Good afternoon, and welcome to Wake Forest Environmental and Epistemic Justice Initiative's third annual Environmental Justice Lecture. This is one of the initiative's cornerstone program. I am Melba Newsom. I'm a program coordinator for the Mellon funded grant, and I am privileged to support Corey D.B. Walker, who is Dean of the Divinity School, Professor of Humanities, and the Principal Investigator for the day-to-day administration of the grant. So the purpose of this program and this initiative is to support collaboration between African American Studies and the Environment and Sustainability Program, with the goal of developing a new humanistic science and technology studies curriculum that centers environmental and epistemic justice at its core. So we are in the fourth year of a 5-year initiative. Our programs have featured a variety of community and public events. The Summer Institute trains and supports environmental journalists. So the program has maintained momentum toward achieving its goal of cultivating a new generation of students and scholars who are equipped to comprehend and respond to our current environmental crisis. So we are proud to be able to bring top-notch EJ speakers to campus, featuring people who have been on the front lines for decades, including Carlton Waterhouse, Dr. Jalone White Newsom, Dr. Ben Chavis, and Dr. Bob Bullard. And tonight, North Carolina native and former EPA Administrator Michael Regan. And to give him a proper introduction, our Professor Crystal Dixon. Thank you.
Everyone. It is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce Michael Regan, the 16th Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, for this evening's discussion. Michael S. Regan was nominated by the 46th President of the United States as the 16th Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency in 2021. Regan has been recognized by many, by leading domestic and global organizations, governments, for his outstanding contributions to environmental protection while spurring economic growth across numerous industries and sectors. His commitment to excellence has been acknowledged through several awards, including Time Magazine, Time 100 Next, Time Magazine, Time 100 Health, among others. Regan has traveled across the country and around the world, meeting face-to-face with communities hit hardest by environmental pollution and threats to public health. In his first year as administrator, Regan established EPA's Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, the first national program office in the agency's history dedicated to solving environmental challenges in economically distressed and frontline communities. Prior to his nomination as EPA Administrator, Regan served as the 17th Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality here with us. As Secretary, he spearheaded in development and the implementation of North Carolina's seminal plan to address climate change and transition the state to a clean energy economy. Under Regan's leadership, he secured the largest coal ash cleanup legal settlement in the United States history. That's pretty remarkable. Thank you so much, Regan there. So with that said, Regan is a graduate of North Carolina A&T University, making him the first EPA administrator to have graduated from the HBCU. He earned a master's degree in public administration from the George Washington University and received an honorary doctorate from North Carolina A&T in 2021. Welcome, Administrator Regan.
Thank you, Professor Dixon, for that wonderful introduction. I should have you come on the road with me. You make me sound really fancy there. Good afternoon, everyone. I tell you, it's a privilege to be here with you all. And Dean Walker and Ms. Newsom, thank you all for inviting me to deliver this 2026 Mellon Environmental Justice Lecture and participate in a fireside chat. to engage in a conversation about a topic that is so near and dear to my heart. There are very few places that feel more grounding, especially right now, than a university setting like Wake Forest University, whose motto embodies the spirit of service, using knowledge, compassion, and talent on behalf of humanity in all its difference and diversity. What a powerful and much needed call to action for all of us. Now, before I start, I do want to clear the air and manage a few of my politics. I think Crystal has said it best. You all, I am very honored to be here. I've told the dean this, at this distinguished university. But I have to say I'm a proud graduate of North Carolina, A&T State University. And just in case there's an Aggie in the audience, Aggie pride. There's always one, yes. I'll also give a shout out to Duke University, where I am fortunate enough to hold a Polis Distinguished Fellowship for the years 2025 and 2026. One of the reasons that I accepted the fellowship is because it's centered in civil discourse and leadership and ethics and the environment. And I'm having a good time there engaging with young folks. All jokes aside, what makes Wake Forest University special to me is its willingness to place justice at the center of its intellectual life. At a time when some would rather silence the hard conversations, as Melba and I were talking about earlier, you all have chosen to lean in. And that matters, not just for scholarship, but for the extremely complex world beyond this university's campus. We've always needed colleges and universities like this to speak up and speak out, and that's especially true right now. It sends a powerful message, the message that you all have chosen to continue to empower the environmental and epistemic justice initiative, not just diminish it, creating a space for these very important conversations. You didn't have to do it. Many aren't doing it, but I thank you all for your courage. And when it comes to the topic of environmental justice, there's no better place to look for that wisdom than the great state of North Carolina, home to the modern environmental justice movement. As many of you know, in 1982, the mostly black residents in Warren County stood up against the dumping of toxic PCBs in so-called landfills at the epicenter of their community. Now, I was a small child when North Carolina decided to greenlight this so-called landfill in the backyards of this historic and prominent black community. But what I do remember, and what's still ingrained in my memory, is the bravery of the men and women who locked arms and laid down in front of those trucks, those bulldozers, and that heavy equipment carrying dirt saturated with highly toxic chemicals. Distinguished leaders like Miss Dolly Burwell, Dr. Ben Chavis, Vernice Miller-Travis, and EPA's own Charles Lee joined concerned community members, just regular old folks, in their solidarity to protest this disgraceful action. At the time, a Washington Post story quoted Reverend Luther Brown, the local pastor of the largest black congregation in the area. And he said, "We know why they picked us. It's because we're a poor county, poor politically, poor in health, poor in education, and because it's mostly black. Nobody thought folks like us would make such a fuss." And as we look back on that moment, we see just how wrong the state of North Carolina and the powers to be were. Because what this community lacked in political power, they made up for in courage. What they lacked in formal education, they made up for it in heart. What they lacked in terms of money in their pockets, they made up for it in faith and hope in their hearts. So not only did they make a fuss, they ignited a national, powerful movement, the national environmental justice movement as we know it today, right here in Warren County, North Carolina. Miss Dolly Burwell put it simply: African Americans determined that henceforth and forevermore, we will have some say in the government that was controlling our destiny. So it is with pride that I say to you all this evening, This is the legacy that shaped Michael Regan well before I walked into the halls of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Listen, I grew up in eastern North Carolina, Goldsboro to be exact. I spent a lot of time hunting and fishing with my father and grandfather in Bladen and Wayne counties, in communities where environmental harm was not something that we constantly read about, but it was something that folks was quietly living with. The leaking coal ash ponds, the big hog farms, the textile industries, all of these things impacting small communities in eastern North Carolina. Growing up, I suffered from asthma-like symptoms, especially on those days where there was a lot of pollution. It forced me to miss out on some of those genuinely good times hunting and fishing with my father and grandfather. It affected my appetite for sports, and I didn't like that. I didn't have the language for environmental injustice at that time, but even then, I knew something was wrong. Those early experiences stayed with me. They followed me into public service. From my first job with EPA as an intern and then a career employee, to my time with the Environmental Defense Fund, then my appointment by Governor Roy Cooper to lead the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, and most recently, serving as the 16th U.S. EPA Administrator under President Biden. I'm very proud to say that on day one of his administration, President Biden directed every single member of his cabinet to embed environmental justice and racial equity into all of our decision-making. And in many ways, I'm proud to say that EPA led that charge. We were the heart of that administration's mission. No cabinet member took that assignment more serious than I did. As a matter of fact, I'm very proud to say that President Biden was the first sitting president in United States history to fully endorse addressing environmental justice issues for frontline communities during a State of the Union address, for millions and millions of people to hear, see, and witness. And that's why at the very beginning of the Biden administration's EPA, we launched what we called Journey to Justice, a national tour designed in partnership with community members, not by politicians and not by national organizations. It was because of my time spent with local leaders that I understood walking the walk meant going out and joining hand in hand with the very community members that were currently facing those injustices. And that's exactly what we did. Journey to Justice took me and my team across the country. And at times, we were completely horrified by what we saw and what we heard. It made us more thoughtful about how we viewed protecting all people equally under the law, because obviously that wasn't happening. I visited economically challenged Black, brown, indigenous, and rural communities across the nation who had borne the brunt of pollution for multiple generations. We went to places like Jackson, Mississippi, where a massive flood, undoubtedly exacerbated by the climate crisis, left 190,000 people in the capital city of Mississippi without drinking water for weeks. We spent time in Lowndes County, Alabama, once the wellspring of the civil rights movement. But what we encountered was not a wellspring. It was plagued by the resurgence of hookworm because of failing wastewater infrastructure. Folks, raw sewage literally spewing out of people's homes into the very yards where their children were playing. I saw this with my own eyes. Children the same age as my son Matthew, playing in the same grass as raw sewage. The toys and the inflatable pools soiled. Can you imagine visiting a home in the United States of America in 2022 and talking with people who recently survived hookworm infections because of unsanitary drinking water conditions? Moms, dads, visiting with children, grandparents. These were our people. I saw similar conditions in McDowell County, West Virginia, and also in the Pacific Northwest. We visited with tribal communities and indigenous leaders in Alaska whose native lands have been tainted by contamination from legacy industrial operations. and whose livelihoods today are currently being jeopardized by the intensity of our changing climate. Folks, you can't get this perspective from leading behind a desk. And you can't hide just because you don't have all the answers. The sad part is many of these people had never had a visit from the mayor or their county commissioner, much less a member of the president's cabinet. And let me tell you, we had to earn their trust. Traveling and meeting face to face with folks who were directly impacted by our work resonated with me, much deeper than the talking points prepared by my team, the motivational words by politicians on the television, or statistics. And it was with the help of local leaders and activists, including some that led the very first movements right here in Warren County, that I was able to find the right audiences when we traveled to over 45 states in more than 14 countries around the world. Now, to spice it up a bit and put a little pressure on Congress and other politicians, during this journey to justice, we invited CNN, MSNBC, local media, social media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, Time Magazine. All of these outlets covered this journey to justice to help community members tell their stories in their words. And as you can imagine, this didn't make us popular. And we dealt with our fair share of threats. But folks, we signed up to do a job. And it demanded equal protection under the law for everyone. Listen, I've personally experienced the anguish of a mother, Miss Deanna Branch, who felt powerless when she found out her young son, Aiden, was poisoned by the lead that he had been drinking in their own home. And the responsibility that she felt he would have to live with those impacts of exposure for the rest of his life. I've met families who for generations have been sickened by the air they breathe and the water they drink. Mr. Robert Taylor, who at the time I met him, he was 81 years young. He took me on a tour and we walked through his neighborhood in Cancer Alley, Louisiana. His wife, who we've since lost, at the time was battling cancer. Their daughter was also battling cancer, and their daughter's son was also battling cancer. 3 generations of people seeking cancer treatments during the same period of time. Yet our government was skeptical that there was any such thing as a cancer cluster. This is in 2022. I know the desperation of communities who've had to rely on their own innovation to manage their local water systems, like in Puerto Rico, where the elders, talking about people who are in their 70s and 80s, are taking care of the plumbing and managing homemade wiring systems to pump fresh water into their communities. The mothers in West Virginia mixing baby formula with water that had been tested positive for fecal matter and bacteria because of failing water systems in this country. From Lowndes County, Alabama, to the indigenous communities in Alaska, these communities taught us that the fight for civil rights is inseparable from the fights for environmental justice, health justice, racial justice, and economic justice. We cannot be for one without being for the others. And the Biden administration understood that viscerally. So from our execution of President Biden's Justice 40 initiative to the $60 billion that EPA received from the bipartisan infrastructure law, to the historic $40+ billion EPA received from the Inflation Reduction Act, my EPA worked hard to ensure that communities who had long borne the burden of pollution were at the front of the line to receive the benefits of these new federal investments. That's right. I really want to stress this point. In addition to the $13 billion annual budget that I oversaw as EPA administrator, we received an additional infusion of over $100 billion from Congress to invest in clean air, clean water, and healthy lands for everyone. And with this great responsibility, we were focused on changing how our government worked and who it worked for, something that so many of you in this room are still fighting for and have dedicated your lives to. And that's why I was proud to come back to Warren County in 2022 to announce the creation of the new Environmental Justice and external civil rights national office, created to center justice in every single thing we did, placing this critical work on an equal platform with the Office of Air, the Office of Water, and all of EPA's other national offices. We dedicated more than 200 EPA staff and billions of dollars in resources towards solving environmental challenges in communities that had long been forgotten. This new office was designed to improve the agency's ability to infuse equity, civil rights, and environmental justice to all aspects, from regulations to enforcement to policy decisions, to ensure vigorous enforcement of civil rights law that prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, as well as gender, disability, or age, and to memorialize the agency's commitment to delivering justice and equity for all. We made this announcement here in Warren County, North Carolina, in front of national press. We pledged in front of the nation. We pledged in front of Congress. We pledged in front of the world that everything we did and everything that I did at EPA would be rooted in the realities and demands and aspirations of communities like Warren County, North Carolina, Cancer Alley, Louisiana, Jackson, Mississippi, and too many others for who the future hasn't always felt certain. Folks, we were finally demonstrating on a global scale that EPA regulations were not just about data and numbers, but about protecting our dignity, our planet, our families, our natural resources, our diverse cultures. Regulations to reduce pollution from power plants and cars and trucks aren't just targeting emissions. They were reducing health challenges faced by children on playgrounds, grandparents rocking on the front porch just trying to enjoy that cool breeze, reducing hospital visits for moms so that they could be at work instead of in the emergency rooms. And if you want to talk economics, we were spurring certainty for investments in all kinds of good jobs for local communities and not rewarding those benefiting from pollution and destruction. Even some of the CEOs that I was regulating were telling me this. We were finally empowering those who have been left behind. We were finally showing up for the people who needed us the most. Those 4 years were some of the most rewarding and enriching of my life. They challenged the idea that expertise only exists in Washington, D.C., or at the state capitol in Raleigh, North Carolina. We acknowledged that the real expertise and solutions were right there in the communities that we were visiting. And that's why under my EPA, we knew we would see tremendous environmental justice benefits when we finalized the standards for coal and natural gas power plants that would avoid more than 1.3 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas pollution, banned the last remaining kind of asbestos linked to more than 40,000 deaths in the United States each year, responded to climate-induced and public health emergencies in communities all across the country, set technology standards for cars and trucks that would avoid 7.2 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas pollution, cleaned up our water across the country with the most significant water regulation in 30 years that would reduce PFAS, or forever chemicals, and an exposure to over 100 million people. And finally, we said enough is enough in Cancer Alley, issuing standards that would reduce elevated cancer risk to families like Mr. Robert Taylor by 96%. Folks, we designed regulations that were cost-effective, that were sound in technology, that reduced elevated risk of cancer for families by 96%. We were moving this country forward together, hand in hand. And now, unfortunately, the current national leadership doesn't share this vision. Elections matter. So these lessons and conversations matter deeply in spaces like this during this moment in time. You all are helping to shape what counts as fact-based knowledge, whose voices are amplified, and which problems are considered worthy of study and debate. Environmental justice is not just about pollution or infrastructure. It's also about the epistemic justice, whose truths are believed and whose are dismissed. These are the things that we must collectively interrogate, and it's never been more vital than now to do this. And for all the young people in the room, there's absolutely no question that you are inheriting a movement at a very complicated moment. We're learning the hard way that progress is not always permanent. We're seeing renewed efforts to completely strip environmental protections beyond measures that even predate the Reagan administration in some cases, restrict how race and equity are discussed, and rolling back significant public health safeguards. These shifts remind us that progress in the environmental justice movement cannot solely rely on the government and federal action. It must be sustained by strong state leadership, and most importantly, strong academic and community power. The truth is, the fight for justice has never been linear. There are peaks and valleys, and we're living through one of those valleys right now. But it's how we use this moment in this time that I believe truly matters. Because make no mistake, when we make it through this valley, and we will, this movement will be stronger, smarter, and more durable. I truly believe that success is being prepared for opportunity. So how do we make sure of that? We have to have conversations like this one. We have to have bravery like this. We must continue to build coalitions all across the country and across issues like environment, health, housing, voting rights, because this injustice is interconnected. And we continue to invest in local leadership because change that lasts is built from the ground up. We must silence all the noise, folks, and focus on our beliefs and support the young minds like those in this room. After all, if not you, my younger colleagues, then who? If you don't push to replace toxic lead pipes that still linger in communities, businesses, churches, and homes in this country, then who will? If you don't demand that all people have clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and the opportunity to lead a healthy life, then who? If you don't invest in decarbonizing our nation's yellow school buses and reimagine what it means to safely transport our children to and from school, then who? The truth is, we need you to help us meet this moment. And universities like Wake Forest University and initiatives like this are the backbone for bridging policy, people, history, and future advocacy and action. So folks, I'm not naive, but I am a prisoner of optimism. This work is heavy. It asks us to confront generational trauma, systemic neglect, and ongoing harm, often in our own communities, with our own families. Burnout is real. Fatigue is real. But optimism isn't a luxury. I consider it a fuel. It's what sustains us and makes this work possible, even on the most difficult days. So I would plead with you to stay connected to culture, stay connected to each other, stay connected to community that reminds us of who we are and why we fight. Celebrate the wins, even the small incremental ones. Rest when needed, and pass the knowledge forward so that the next generation is prepared and not overwhelmed. North Carolina gave birth to this movement. Warren County lit the spark, and gatherings like this ensure that the flame continues to burn bright. I hope you all remember that you have an obligation to keep fighting. You're part of a lineage of courage and creativity that has already changed this nation and this state once. And we will do it again. and we'll keep trying until we reach that more perfect union. So I want to say thank you all for being here. Thank you all for what you do. Thank you for carrying this legacy forward. And thank you all for having me here today.
Michael, thank you so much for that truly inspiring, informative, and most importantly, timely lecture. You began your talk by noticing really the power of place in your own formation, and that policy reflects places, places across this nation, Louds County, Jackson, Mississippi, the Great Northwest, Puerto Rico. Talk to us a bit about how that unique and special place of Goldsboro, North Carolina, shaped and informed you, and who were some of the mentors that you remember that really informed your journey? And of course, talk about that place of North Carolina A&T in your journey.
Well, you know, I will say that for me, it probably became personal much earlier than normal. Because, you know, I think most of us just idolize our grandparents and our parents, and you want to be like them and you want to be with them. And so, you know, when your family spends most of their time outdoors and you're puffing on an inhaler, it's just not the best feeling in the world. And so, you know, that's sort of one perspective. The other perspective is, you know, Goldsboro was probably like a lot of towns in eastern North Carolina that at one point in time were booming with textiles. And then all of a sudden, NAFTA hits, globalization, and you start to see all of these buildings become decrepit. And they're leaking all kinds of things because people have abandoned them. And you've got these Superfund sites and these brownfields. You know, when you're riding the school bus and you're seeing this, and you're talking to some of your classmates who live in very close proximity, things sort of get pretty tight. Mm-hmm. My father graduated from North Carolina A&T State University, and so that was my first exposure to the university. But actually, Reverend William Barber is from Goldsboro as well. And so, you know, I was fortunate enough to see him churning, you know, on a weekly and monthly basis. And so high school, college, coming in from Goldsboro, North Carolina, to an institution like A&T that was ready to receive me as an individual and help me understand who I was and what my place is in life, I think it gave me a competitive edge. I think it made me a lot more sensitive to things. And so when I started my career at EPA, I had a BS degree in environmental science from North Carolina A&T State University. But I quickly realized at the agency that the decisions at the highest level really weren't being made by scientists. They were being made by lawyers and folks who were steeped in policy and politics and management. And that is what spurred my desire to pursue a master's degree. So, you know, I think I'm fortunate in my journey up until this point has been very personal. I've been sort of living out the things that I want to see resolved. And I've just met so many people along the way that inspired me in ways that I never thought. Because when I thought I had it the worst, that Journey to Justice tour really kept me up at night.
That personal journey really informed how you think about policy. And you didn't just leave it at the level of the individual. You began to think through what does it mean for communities, what does it mean for our state, what does it mean for our nation, and indeed our world. Talk to us of how you began to think differently about policy, not just as a remedy for one thing, but policy truly as a mechanism to emancipate us to an existence that's more just for all people.
I think my first real experience with that was I started working at the EPA the summer after graduating from A&T, and I was pursuing my master's degree at the same time I was working full-time. And we were reading case studies, and we were having conversations that were very academic, and in many cases, outdated information based on what I was seeing on a daily basis. And so that sort of challenged me in real time to say, well, if you have a conversation in an academic setting, or if you sit in an office and you are the master of a specific policy, do we really know if it's working? And in those earlier days at EPA, I was working with a lot of community members who were telling me it wasn't working, and what we were doing was not hitting the ground. I was working at EPA during that time, during the last 2 years of the Clinton administration, who, by the way, President Clinton signed the first executive order to really give some heft to environmental justice. And during the transition of the Bush administration, there was some small things that happened that at the time I was trying to process. Something as small as when you think about cost-benefit analysis and the value of life, why do the numbers change? Should the numbers change? The value of life is the value of life, and health benefits are health benefits. When I look back on those Bush years, we long for that now. But at the time, I was young and I was outraged. And so I left EPA a little bit disillusioned to join Environmental Defense Fund because I thought this national nonprofit would get me closer to people, and it actually did. But really, I think from a policy standpoint, when Roy Cooper ran for governor the first time, I had never actively participated in a political race. We were a family that was educated and we voted, but we didn't get too close to politics. But Governor Cooper said some things about clean energy and education and people, and he was from Eastern North Carolina, that kind of reeled me in. And so I decided to kind of see if politicians and policy and regulations could really intersect in the appropriate way. I thought at the time that I would be lucky if I could get a policy position job or maybe a consulting job. But when the governor interviewed me for the Secretary of Environment, it's one of those things where the dog caught the bus. And to answer your question directly, as Secretary of DEQ, I knew enough to know that the people in that building didn't have the connection to community, so I established the first state-level environmental justice advisory committee. And it was there, in very painful ways, that I, as a secretary, and my division directors and the policy experts would sit in a room and have very painful conversations with community members. Because I knew my staff was working overtime, but it wasn't connecting with the community. People were still drinking tainted water. People were still living too close to coal ash ponds. People were still getting overspray from hog lagoons. And in real time, we were saying, well, the manual and the policies and the academic research says this, but these people are experiencing that. And so I began then to really wrestle with, and I think Governor Cooper would say we pushed the limits to match politics, policy, political rhetoric, and real regulations and implementation.
In that story, you really talk about and highlight and really underscore the ways in which regimes of knowledge of policy, the ways in which we think about regulations, and ultimately our everyday politics, how they hit the ground, sometimes conflict with expert knowledge, scientific knowledge, and also local knowledges, knowledges in communities, knowledges embodied particularly in those discarded communities. Talk to us about how you begin to navigate those tensions, because I know the scientist in the room wants to really elevate the scientific expertise, and that then really goes to helping those communities and dealing with cold ash responses and those health effects, and ultimately helps to develop good policy recommendations. How do we begin to negotiate these varying knowledge regimes, not diminishing one, but allowing them to collaborate so that we can build a better world?
You know, it's a little bit akin to a student coming into a professor and saying, hey, you don't know everything. You don't have all the answers. At first, it's like a shock. I mean, it's obvious that a professor or anyone can't know everything, but to be told that, it sort of hits you. I think that people who, let me just say this, the people that work for the Department of Environmental Quality or the EPA, they're kind of different than maybe somebody that works at the IRS. You know, they actually believe and they are passionate and they are doing the best that they can. And so to be told that your homework isn't the best, or as a policy expert that you're not getting it right, it stings a little bit. But if you create this space for communication and equality and level setting and exchange of information, then you start to get into, oh, guess what? We're not monitoring consistently in these communities. The more affluent communities, they have the continuous monitoring. They have the protections. But on the other side of the railroad track, you know, there's more companies over there. The pollution is more concentrated, yet we have less monitoring for air and water. Something wrong here. And then you start to realize the data is fundamentally flawed. Well, then you get your lawyers and everyone saying, well, we can't say that. We can't admit that. And then it becomes a struggle. Well, if we don't say it or admit it, how do we make it right? And I think we started to slowly work to make things right and build trust with communities. And I think that's where it's not just the communities changed. It changed the people in these agencies. And they didn't see their work the same anymore. So, you know, there's a level of vulnerability that is required. There's a level of humility that is required. There's a level of risk that we all have to take. But as I understood my job as secretary and as EP administrator, clean air, clean water, and healthy lands for everyone, not just some.
You talk about those real great character traits of trust, humility, deep hospitality, welcoming that which is other, and also that key word that's right at the center of your vision, political, environmental, and really ethical vision of justice. How do we begin to think through that capacious vision in a moment where justice is pitted as a zero-sum game, that if one person wins, another person loses?
Yes.
How do we begin to language justice in our moment where policy regimes have gone back, not just to prior to the Biden administration, but even as early as what was going on in the Regan administration? And for our students, that's over 40 years ago. How do we begin to reset a broad and capacious vision for environmental justice?
You know, I think that's a great question, and I think it's rooted in authenticity. I think that we all have to recognize that we all possess individual power. We have a voice, we have intellect, and I think the first thing to do is to see yourself as a powerful individual that has a right to express yourself, because what we're seeking in this day and time is an honest debate. It's not whether Democrats or Republicans are right or wrong. It's the fact that those who seek to sow division have created an environment where we don't talk, where we don't debate, where the best ideas no longer win. And so I think that my philosophy is for anyone that I encounter, there's more that we have in common than we do that's different. When I was nominated to be EP administrator, I had to testify before the Senate. And it's customary that you have elected officials in your state present you to the Senate. And Richard Burr and Tom Tillis presented me to the Senate, and they gave full-throated endorsements. And in that endorsement, there was never statements like Michael and I agreed on everything. But we talked about the decency in which we engaged in differing ideas to come up with the best solution for North Carolinians. And so I just think that we have to avoid the us versus them. I think we should seek out people who actually think differently than us. It's a big country, it's a big state, it's a big world. And I think just understanding and accepting individuality and engaging in conversation and building coalitions, I think that is what's gonna help dig us out of this hole. I think the other thing is we all just really need to get back to facts and science and real data and real numbers. History, everyone always flirts with the number to make it say what they want it to say, but at least you're kind of working with the same numbers. Now, the numbers are out the door. The facts are out the door. And especially for the generations that are coming up, we cannot let that stand. So my advice is for those in elementary school all the way up to those who are 80 and 90, we've got to start talking again and start sharing ideas and come up with the best ideas to govern this country.
You ended your talk on a note that you were a prisoner of optimism, a prisoner of hope. What advice would you have to emerging leaders, particularly emerging leaders in the environmental justice community for this moment? You admit that we are at a valley moment, but you also recognize that it doesn't last always. Right. This moment won't last always. But it does seem to be a tremendous mountain.
Yes.
What would be your advice to those emerging leaders that are coming out, some of whom are in this room?
My advice is, first of all, it's not about us. It's not about any one individual. If we look back on history, for every peak and every valley, the peaks keep getting higher and higher and higher, and we keep getting closer and closer and closer. And I think that the next generations that come can get us even closer. I think it's important to have respect for those who have come before us, who have worked and have sacrificed and who have experienced. And when you sit down and talk to some of these people, it quickly helps you to think about how you use your time and talents and your voices and your individuality to help the next person. I'll give a good example. We all have to find different ways to find motivation, but the Jackson, Mississippi example that I gave you all, the 190,000 people that went without clean drinking water, there was a young lady on my staff at the time. She was 35, and she was from Jackson, Mississippi. And she said that in all of her 35 years, they always had boil water notices. They always had trouble with the drinking water. This latest storm just exacerbated it and put it on the national scale. The first time I visited Jackson, Mississippi, I was invited into the home of a woman by the name of Miss Ollie Anderson. And at the time, Miss Anderson was in her late 80s. And she sat there and held my hand and she said, "There've been a lot of people that have promised to fix this, and we're counting on you to fix this. And that's when you realize there's nowhere to go. This is about me as an individual, working with my team as a team, all of us trying our very, very best to use our individual talents for the sake of someone else and nothing else. And long story short, we visited Jackson, Mississippi 5 times. I did as secretary, just trying to solve this one problem. And we finally got the funding. We finally got the mayor on board. We got a federal judge to put it under a review so that all the money was going to solve these problems. And on that 5th trip, before I could get back to Jackson, Miss Ollie Anderson died. And I never got a chance to look at her and say, together, we did it. But that was very early in the environmental justice tour. And I promised myself and the team that every community we went into, we were going to give it our best because we didn't know how long these people were going to be able to hang on. And so, you know, again, my message is it's never about us. We're blessed, we're fortunate in so many ways. And so when you think about public service, and I hope everyone has or will think about public service and doing something for others, this current leadership, national leadership, seems to demonize public servants, government workers, state workers. But these are the very people who actually, at times, grab hands with the communities and actually solve problems for the majority of us, like Miss Ollie Anderson, or like Mr. Robert Taylor, or Miss Deanna Branch. I could go on and on and on with these names because I remember these people, because they're real. And that goes back to when you're engaging with these real people and you have a position of power. You're at a university, you can do some research, you can go out to a community, you can share information. That's power that people are craving for. And I would say use that wisely.
And we will hope and continue to be blessed by the spirit of Miss Ollie Anderson and those great other saints who continue to propel not only us and this generation, but future generations. Michael and I can continue to go on and on all night. But we know that time is short, and we also have a wonderful reception where we can continue the conversation. But I want to open up the floor for a few questions from you to pose to Michael.
Hi, I'm Sydney Smith. I'm a first-year law student at Wake Forest University. I'm interested in practicing environmental law. I appreciate how candid you've been this evening, especially when you draw the difference between things at the federal level versus how much opportunity is at the state levels as well.
Yes.
Right now, there's a lot going on at the federal level. And I was wondering if you had any advice, particularly for law students and other professionals, as to how we can navigate either looking for opportunities at that federal level and still trying to insert ourselves in those spaces to have a positive trickle-down effect, or if, in your opinion, it's worthwhile to be very over-invested at the state and local levels right now?
You know, that's an excellent question. And I'm trying to think about which slogan do I want? You know, do you double dutch or do you walk and chew gum at the same time? I think that you have to look at the timing of these things. And I think that if you weren't a first year and you were graduating, I would say that there are significant opportunities at the state level. Because even when you look at what's going on, real conservatives and real Republicans still think of cooperative federalism, right? So these politics are very interesting in terms of ideology and sort of what people really believe in. But I think that there are ample opportunities for states to continue to step up and play the role, whether it's partner or an antagonist to the federal government. I also think, though, that there are a lot of people who are holding on at the federal level because this too shall pass. And at some point, the change will come. whether it's a different kind of Republican or whether it's a Democrat, a lot of what I believe the politics we're seeing today are representative of one individual, not a party. And so the laws, as you know, are the laws. And at some point, if we have enough resistance with brilliant legal minds continuing to present the facts at the circuit court, at the Supreme Court, at the state court, I do believe that the Constitution and the laws that govern our states are strong enough to hold on until this country is ready to continue to move forward in these ways. I see Bill Holman here, who was a secretary of DEQ, and I see Stan Myberg, who was a deputy administrator at EPA. I've had the opportunity to do both at both levels. There's power in both of those levers. And so when you think about teamwork and when you think about the totality of it, you're not doing any of this alone. So where's your cohort? Where's your coalition? And then it's like a football team. All of y'all have to play a different position. Some of you will want to play at the federal level. Some of you will need to stay at the state level. Some of you will need to be in corporate law. Some of you will need to be purely on the antagonistic side in the nonprofit and community space. But that inside-outside game has to come together to preserve this democracy and protect everybody. And so that's a long-winded way of me saying, know your power, know your voice, pick your place, and also pick your team.
Any other questions?
Good afternoon. My name is Kanaya Davis. I'm a senior journalism student at North Carolina A&T State University.
Happy Pride.
I was curious to know, how do you suggest college students and young people who are kind of new to the environmental justice movement to get involved in their local communities, even at a local level and a national level?
That's a great question. And, we can talk offline as well. There are just so many environmental justice groups who have been steeped in the movement for long periods of time. Some of them know their role and they just focus on their communities. Some of them are statewide. And then some of them obviously are at the federal level. There's a young lady here in North Carolina, Lamisha Whittington, Democracy Green. She is amazing. And she really is focusing on EJ at the community level, especially as we look at forever chemicals and look at water pollution. But then you've got the next generation, William Barber III, who is also here in North Carolina. And sort of different from his father, William is focused on the financing and the economics behind clean energy and clean tech, and what that means when you have proper placement in a community that has been languished or not invested in. And so my point is there are a lot of points of entry, and I think it depends on sort of what your interest is, whether it's community, state, and federal, and then what the topic is, whether you want to be really in the streets or really focused on water quality or thinking about financing clean tech and clean energy so that more people can breathe cleaner air. The last thing I'll say is I think not just for the environmental justice movement, but the environmental movement is so different than it was when I started, because now just about every discipline is so visible in the movement. There's not a discipline that I am aware of that is not used in the corporate sector or the private sector to further or advance environmental protection. And there's a false notion here that environmental protection and economic prosperity are mutually exclusive. They're not. So I think that we can look at various combinations and ways to think about contributing, but my advice is still the same. Think about your purpose, your talents, and how you want to use your time, and there are plenty of places that you can align.
Well, Michael, I want to thank you for delivering a very powerful lecture, and also for your very candid, critical, and most importantly, courageous conversation. It's often through conversations that we risk a lot.
Yes.
Because conversations hold out the possibility that we may be transformed. And your call for more conversation across our nation and indeed across our world holds out the possibility, the very distinct possibility that we can live into a more just future for all.
Yes.
I want to thank you for being our 2026 Mellon Environmental Justice Lecturer, and thank you for delivering a very powerful message to our community here at Wake Forest. And I want to invite each and every one of you to our reception where we can continue the conversation with Michael and with one another as we continue our journey of justice today and every day. Thank you and good evening.